Hari ul Adonai kol haaretz yidu et Adonai b'simcha bo'u lefanav b'nana bo'u lefanav b'nana Hari ul Adonai kol haaretz yidu et Adonai b'simcha.
Shabbat Shalom to you all, and I hope everybody is going to have a Shabbat of very, very deep peace, tranquility, and love. And we start with the announcements for the week. On behalf of Bet David in Santon, and Bet Menorah in Pretoria, and Bet David in Durban, we welcome you to another Shabbat hybrid service. We're pleased to be able to have some congregants in our synagogue. We invite you all to join us as often as you possibly can, and to join in with us, particularly in person, live in the synagogue. And we request that when you do come here that you keep your masks on to protect everybody else. And when you come up to read here, if anybody's around you would have your mask on as well, please too, and to sanitize. If you'd like to sponsor a Shabbat service to celebrate a simcha in your family or simply to support the congregation, please let the office know that. And Shabbat candles tonight are going to be lit by Les Khan.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu ladlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of the Shabbat and thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. We now hand over to Rabbi Elisheva, who's going to give us her opening remarks.
A lull before we to Hanukkah. Oh, are we on? Good. So we are in this momentary lull, before we get to Hanukkah. And we, in Hanukkah we celebrate two miracles, really. One is the military victory, and the other is the one that we think of as the miracle of the oil. And it's so fascinating to me that the rabbis emphasize the miracle of the oil. Because what it teaches us is that within even the most terrible, disastrous thing, to have to go to war, to fight for your right to be yourself, to be surrounded by people who want to change your viewpoint, your vision, who you are, that in the midst of that, there is also the miracle of finding light. And, I think we're still all reeling from the extraordinary, tragic death of Eliyahu K. And there's no light in the loss of our youth, of our vibrant, beautiful youth. But it brings always to me this notion that we have two kinds of miracles, the miracles that are won with blood and the miracles that are brought with light. And sometimes we live in the ones that are bloody and they're terrible, and the toll that they take is incredible. And sometimes we get to hold up the torch and bring in the light. And so that is what we are doing tonight. Welcoming with this beautiful light, thank you so much, our Shabbat, our torch that will last us for many, many years. We start on page 130. בזמירות נביע לו. For Adonai is a great God, the ruler of all divine beings. And we are the people God tends, the flock in God's care. Oh, if we could but heed God's charge on this day. Can we sing a new song? Shir l'Adonai shir chadash, Shir l'Adonai kol ha'aretz, Shir l'Adonai baruch shemo, basru miyom liyom yeshuato. Sing a new song every day. Sing a new song all of the earth. Sing, bless God's name, praise God's name. Proclaim the victory of the light day after day. We continue on with Psalm 98 on page 133. Mizmor shir l'Adonai shir chadash, ki niflaot asa, Hoshia lo yimino, v'ezra kodsho, Hodi Adonai yeshuato, L'nei hagoyim gilat zako, Zecher chasto v'emanato, L'beit Yisrael, Ra'uhu koho, Avsei aretz, Et Yeshuat Adonai. Raise a shout to Adonai, all the earth. Break into glorious songs of praise. Which brings us to Zamru l'Adonai, and the choir will take us in beautiful melody.
Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, 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 v'kol zimra, b'chatzotzrot v'kol shofar, shofar, hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai. Zamru l'Adonai bechinor, 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 v'kol zimra, b'chatzotzrot v'kol shofar, shofar, hariu lifnei hamelech Adonai. Yiram hayamom lo, tevel v'yoshvei ba, ne'arot yimchau chaf yachad, harim yeranenu, lifnei Adonai kiva, kiva, yishpot haaretz, yishpot tevel betzedek, ve'ami b'meisharim. Yiram hayamom lo, tevel v'yoshvei ba, ne'arot yimchau chaf yachad, harim yeranenu.
sorry, page 135. This speaks of the presence of the divine enthroned upon the cherubim, the angels with wings, and the beauty of the chariot of the divine is described so wonderfully in Ezekiel. I highly recommend you take a moment and look at it at some point during this Shabbat. This notion of glory, again, has to do with the light. And Ezekiel describes the thing that he can see, the part of God that he can see, as chashmal, as luminescence, as electromagnetism, as all color and no color. And this is actually the word that was chosen to represent electricity in modern Hebrew. So I always, when I get to this psalm, I think, oh, to be sitting upon these winged creatures that can look out in all directions with all facets of creation, and to be emitting only light, isn't that just the most beautiful vision of the divine? So we can read together. Adonai, enthroned on cherubim, is sovereign. Peoples tremble, the earth quakes. Adonai is great in Zion and exalted above all peoples. They praise your name as great and awesome. God is holy. Mighty ruler who loves justice, it was you who established equity, you who worked righteous judgment in Jacob. Exalt Adonai our God and bow down to God's footstool. God is holy. Romevu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehakodsho. Romevu Adonai Eloheinu v'hishtachavu lehakodsho. Page 136. Mizmor Shir, Mizmor Shir, Mizmor Shir leDavid. Havu l'Adonai b'nei Eli, Havu l'Adonai kavod va'oz, Havu l'Adonai kavod shemo, Yishtachavu l'Adonai b'chadrat kodesh. Kol Adonai al mayim, el hakavod hir'im, Adonai al mayim rabim. Kol Adonai b'koach, Kol Adonai behadar, Kol Adonai shover arazim, v'yishaver Adonai et arze halvano, v'yikidem kemo egel levanon v'sirion, kemo ben raimim. Kol Adonai chotzef lavodesh, Kol Adonai yachil midbar, yachil Adonai midbar kodesh, Kol Adonai yicholel ayalot. V'yichesof ya'arot, u'behechalo, kulo omer kavod. Adonai lemavu yashav, vayeshev Adonai melech leolam. Adonai oz le'amo yitain. Adonai yevarech et amo b'shalom. We turn to page 138 for L'chadodi.
La 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 l'chadodi, la 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 likrat kala, la 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 pnei Shabbat, pnei Shabbat nekabelam, shamon וזכור, בדיבור אחד, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. אותי. לה 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 לקראת כלה. לה 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 פני שבת. פני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לכו ונלכה. כי מקור הברכה מראש מקדם נסוכה. סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לי 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 לה 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 לקראת אותי. לה 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 לקראת כלה. לה 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 פני שבת. פני שבת נקבלה. התעוררי, התעוררי, כי האורך קומי אורי. אורי אורי שדברי. כבוד אדוני עלייך נגלה. לי 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 לה 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 לקראת אותי. לה 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 לקראת כלה. לה 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 פני שבת. פני שבת נקבלה. בואי בשלום עטרת בעלה. גם בשמחה ובשולה. תוך אמונה עם סגולה. בואי חלה, בואי חלה. לי 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 לה 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 לקראת אותי. לה 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 לקראת כלה. לה 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 פני שבת. פני שבת נקבלה. מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון. ולזמר לשמך עליון. להגיד בבוקר חסדך, חסדך. ואמונתך בלילות, בלילות. עלי עשור ועלי נבר. עלי היגיון בחינוך, בחינוך. מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון. ולזמר לשמך עליון.
כי שימחתני,
שימחתני אדוני בכל לך, בכל לך. במעשה ידיך ארנן, ארנן. מה גדלו מעשיך אדוני מאוד. עמקו מחשבותיך, מחשבותיך. מזמור שיר ליום השבת. טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון. ולזמר לשמך עליון.
to sing always the praises, to be ourselves also planted in the courtyards of glory, where we are always able to sway and to share our fruit with the divine. That opportunity to return, this is where we are at Hanukkah, the rededication of ourselves. It's been a few weeks since Yom Kippur, and it's time to come back to make the sanctuary holy again, to clear off whatever we happen to have accumulated, and to start fresh, to welcome in the spring in its beauty and its fruitfulness with the light of old. L'hagid ki yashar Adonai, tzuri velo avlat avo. We rise as we turn to page 144 for the Chatzi Kaddish.
Thank you. You can be seated. We now turn to page 148. This is pretty much standard every evening in the Maori prayers, the prayers we're going to be saying now. The purpose of the filah, these meditations, are to raise our consciousness of things we generally take for granted. You drive home in the evening, and by the time you get home, it's either dark or it's not dark. It's getting dark whilst you're in the office, whilst you're at work, and you don't notice these changes of seasons, how the world is changing all the time. And at least on Shabbat, or any time we pray, this particular prayer, you just stop for a moment and you start thinking about the amazingness of how the world changes from night to day, from darkness to light. There's a change in the seasons. It's summer one time, it's autumn, spring, it's winter. All the seasons change all the time. And everything around us is changing and evolving. And the idea here is we're supposed to raise our consciousness, that we're not just going through life completely oblivious of these amazing things that are happening around us. And the purpose of this tefillah, which we're saying now, which begins our Maori Prayer on page 149, is to do exactly that. We're going to read the English. I'd like you please read with me, and we'll read this together. Page 149. Praise to you, eternal our God, for whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which the time and seasons glide. Your breath guides us, sail of the stars, creator of the time and light. You guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans into infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, eternal our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. Page 150. Before we start saying the Shema is an affirmation of our love for God. It starts off by talking about God's love for us. That starts first. The behind this is the notion that God always loves humans, and we can start with our presumption that God loves us. And the statement here is the love that God has for us. I want to remind you that the word love is a verb. A verb is a doing word. You don't love, you love by doing things. Love requires action. And I recall, I've mentioned this many times, a consultant telling me that somebody had told him that he doesn't love his wife. And he said that with real pain and with real difficulty. And his response was, oh, well then love her. Love requires actions. And it's through the actions that the love comes about. But without the actions, it doesn't happen. When we talk about our love of God, it's not that we love God, in theory. It's that you do things which are lovable to God, like the way that you treat the earth, the way that you treat your fellow man, and you express things that God expresses towards us, towards other people. Let's say this together on top of page 150. I'll read the Hebrew and then we'll join in English at the end. Ahavat olam, Beit Yisrael amcha ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot, chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadata. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu, b'shochveinu v'kumeinu, nasiach b'chukecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed. Page 51. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol. All these things your Torah gives us. The more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives. What could be a truer token of your abiding love than this holiness of your works and the living language that gives its form? Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amor Yisrael. We're now going to say the Shema. The Shema is the central affirmation of our faith. What is unusual about the central affirmation of our faith, which we say at least 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and before you go to bed. What's most amazing about this is that if you look at the English, you might miss the most important point. It doesn't say da, know. Da is knowledge. Da means to know. It doesn't say da, Adonai Eloheinu. It says Shema. Shema means to listen. Listen. There's something that happens to people when they listen. And wherever you are, you can always listen and see things which should be inspiring. In my home, when I daven at home, I hear birds, I hear dogs. I can hear some road noise, and I can hear somebody next door using a pneumatic drill or an electric drill. You hear all these noises. And whether what you're hearing is street noise, cars are a miracle of God, aren't they? Man didn't invent cars. Man deciphered the amazing science in the universe which was there, which God had created for us to discover. And these cars, all these mechanical things that we see, these electronic things that we see, these miracles that we see around us, that's God making a world as much as he made the birds and the dogs. So when we say Shema, let's listen to things. Listen to what you can hear. And we concentrate to listen by covering our eyes. And the point we want to come across here is Adonai Eloheinu. Adonai is our God. Adonai Echad. Not that God is one, but that one is God. Everything around us just screams God when you listen carefully. Let's do that together.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
154, let's read this aloud together. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantan levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'v'lechtecha v'derech u'v'shochbecha u'v'kumecha וכשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. In translation below. You shall love your eternal God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions which I charge you this day. Impress them on your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you're away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be a symbol before your eyes. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates. Left-hand side of the page. Laman tizguru v'asitem kol mitzvotai v'item kodushim le'elohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem emet. You shall remember and observe all my commandments, to be holy to your God. I am the eternal God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am your eternal God. We now turn to page 158, and the choir will lead us through Micha Mocha.
Micha Mocha Ba'elim Adonai, Micha Mocha Nedar BaKodesh, Nora Tehilot Osef Ele, Nora Tehilot Osef Ele, Malchut Para'u Vanecha, Bokeh Hayam Lifnei Moshe u'Miriam, Zeli Anu Ve'amru, Adonai Imlo
V'amar ki fada Adonai et Yaakov ugalo miyad chazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. On page 160. Let's read this together. Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace and rise up, our sovereign, to a life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel. For your name's sake, be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. God, our going out and our coming in. To life, to peace, evermore. Baruch atah Adonai, hapurei sukat shalom aleinu, v'kol Yisrael, v'al Yerushalayim. We now turn to page 162, and the choir is going to lead us through Yismachu.
Yammiri bam bam bam, Shabbat, Shabbat. Yammiri bam bam bam, Shabbat, Shabbat. Yammiri bam bam bam, Shabbat, Shabbat. Shabbat, 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 Shabbat. Yismechu, Yismechu v'malchutcha. Yismechu, Yismechu v'malchutcha. Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Shabbat. V'koreo nigonet Shabbat. Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Shabbat, v'koreo nigonet Shabbat. U'nigonet Shabbat, Shabbat, u'nigonet Shabbat, Shabbat. Kolam yisbehu ve'itanegu mitovecha Shabbat, Shabbat. Yismechu, Yismechu v'malchutcha. Yismechu, Yismechu v'malchutcha. Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Shabbat. V'koreo nigonet Shabbat. Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Shabbat. V'koreo nigonet Shabbat. U'titol Shabbat, Shabbat. U'titol Shabbat, Shabbat. Chemdat yamim oto karata. Zecher lemase v'reshit Shabbat, Shabbat. Yismechu, Yismechu v'malchutcha. Yismechu, Yismechu v'malchutcha. Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Shabbat. V'koreo nigonet Shabbat. Shomrei Shabbat, Shomrei Shabbat. V'koreo nigonet Shabbat.
We now turn to the Amidah on page 164. This is when we stand. Amidah means to stand. It's the central meditation, central tefillah of the service. It's got, you'll see, we follow a particular script for this. We meditate on these words, and at the end of it, there's a point where we will be able to say our own silent prayers. It's traditional whenever you've got to come across something that just stirs you, respond in prayer to it. This is just a guideline. It's a meditation which guides us along, and we fill in our personal prayers anywhere along the way. So we stand. It's traditional that when you say the Amidah, you take a couple of steps backwards, as if you're walking into the presence of God, 3 steps forward. When we say the words Baruch, Atah, bend your knees and bow Atah, then we say Adonai, and you have to stand up straight when you say Adonai. The reason you stand up straight is because God doesn't want us crumpled. God wants us strong, looking people straight in the eye, looking Him straight in the eye. We stand up straight to express how God would like us people to be. We begin now with the Amidah.
Adonai sefata tiftachu fi yagitei latecha. Adonai sefata tiftachu fi yagitei latecha. Baruch
168, Ata gibor le'olam Adonai, machayeh hakol ata rav loshia, mashiv haruach u'morit hageshem, mazriach hashemesh u'morit hatal, mechalkel chayim bechesed, mechayeh hakol barachamim rabim, somech noflim, v'rofei cholim, u'matir asurim, umkayem emunato lishenei afar, mi chamocha ba'al gvurot u'mido melach, melech memit umchayeh u'matzmiach Yeshua, v'ne'eman nata l'chayot hakol, Baruch Ata Adonai Mechayeh Hakol. Ata Kadosh v'Shimcha Kadosh, Kadoshim b'chol yom me'alu chasela, Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. We turn now to page 172, middle of the page. You set aside the seventh day for your name, the pinnacle of creation, and you blessed it above all other days, more sacred than all festival times. So it's written in your Torah. The heaven and earth were finished, and all their array. On the seventh day God finished it, all the work that he had been doing, and God ceased on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God ceased from making all the work of creation. We turn to page 176. 176 is the Modim. Modim means we thank you. We thank you. One of the ways in which we enter into the presence of God and can feel godliness in the universe and can feel the holiness of the universe is when we say thank you. Thank you for all the things that we see. Let's take a few moments before we do anything else and just thank God for the things that we have, all the things we have, from the clothes that you have, the people that are around you, to friends, to business successes, anything at all, before we say this formally together. Let's do the Modim privately now. If you're still praying and you still got lots more to say, and I'm sure you do, just keep going. I'm going to read the Hebrew. Modim anachnu lach, she'atahu Adonai Eloheinu ve'Elahei avotenu l'olam va'ed. Tzur chayenu magen ish'enu atahu l'dor v'dor. Nodeh lecha nsapeh tilatecha, al chayenu hamasurim b'yodecha, al nishmotenu hapekudot lach, al nisecha sheb'chol yom imanu, for all the miracles that are with us every day, for your wondrous deeds and favors at every time of the day, evening, morning, and noon. O God, whose mercies never end, O compassionate one, whose kindness never fails, we forever put our hope in you. Al kulam yitbarach v'yitromam shemcha malkeinu tamid le'olam v'ed. V'chol ha'chaim ha'el yeshuatenu v'ezratenu sela, Baruch Ata Adonai, hatov shemcha l'chana el lehodot. Top of page 178. Grant us peace. 179. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, our eternal source of peace. Give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of every land. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Baruch Atah Adonai, Vorech et Amo Yisrael, Bashalom. We always end off with a private prayer. On page 181 and page 180 and 181, you'll see three different prayers. On page 180, there's a prayer that God will guard us from speaking things which we shouldn't talk about, whether it's nastiness or lies or anything else. Very often people say things, once you've said it, you can't take it back. If you find yourself doing that, there may be a prayer you'd like to focus on. On the top of page 181 is the idea of fashioning a pure heart, that you really wish you can get that your heart will be pure and you'll be doing the right things. And the last one is trying to find quietness in your life. Pick any one of these and just read them quietly to yourself. I'd like to make a connection between the piece we read in the Torah last week, which talks about Dinah. That was the son of Jacob, and Dinah was raped as she walked around the town. She was taken by a man who had a lot of power, a prince, and he raped her. And this is something that we hear again and again in our society. In the Torah, the brothers are so irate, they actually take revenge on not only the man himself, but they take a revenge on the whole city. And Jacob chastises them for overreaction. But Dinah was raped. Dinah was raped. A couple of days back, we began the 16 days it's a national 16 days against violence against women. And I'd like you please to watch this video, and I'll show you how this ties in with Hanukkah, which is coming up now.
Of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. V'shebeirach Avoteinu Mekor habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit. Let us say the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
All of these were taken in South Africa during the COVID period. We must remember. In 168 BC, the ruler of the Syrian kingdom, Antiochus, decided he was going to have a campaign to squash Judaism amongst his subjects around his very, very large terrain. This idea was that he wanted everybody to have a single religion across the board, and that was it. And so he made a deliberate effort to see to it that in the land of Israel, the worship of their God and their culture should be stopped, and they should all have one culture, the one that he had decided. And so what he did was he turned the temple into a pagan temple. He banned Jewish practices, so that if you studied Torah, if you had a Brit Milah, a circumcision, or if you kept the Shabbat, you'll be punished by death. And in a town called Modi'in, near Jerusalem, they came into the town and they got the Kohen, priest of the town, and they wanted him to sacrifice a pig on an altar. And by the way, they had a mobile altar. So they brought the altar there for the priest of the town to slaughter the pig in praise of some god. And of course he refused, and he stood up, and his people killed the soldiers. The story we're going to be reading about, or the story that goes behind Hanukkah, is a liberation from oppression, and liberation from oppression has been going on since forever. This type of oppression, this freedom of worship, freedom of religion, and freedom of thought, it's been going on for a long time. In the United States, you had the McCarthy era, where you weren't allowed to be a communist. If they thought you were a communist, that you lost your jobs, you were prejudiced against, and really terrible things happened to people who they thought perhaps could have been communists. In exactly the same way, we see in China how they've ganged up against the Uyghurs. In Myanmar, we've got the Rohingyas. Throughout Europe, you had the Jews. In the Ottoman Empire, you had the Armenians. We've been doing this, eradicating people's right to free choice and freedom of religion and freedom of expression. What happened was that the sons of the Kohen Matityahu, led by Judah the Maccabee, a ragtag bunch of people, started guerrilla warfare. They acted as guerrillas with nothing really other than probably pitchforks and a couple of knives and maybe some swords. And they were standing up against a mighty army who were well trained, well armed, and there just seemed to be multitudes of them. As many as they were killed, more were coming in. And this went on not for a weekend after the riots. The riots against the regime didn't last a week, they didn't last 2 weeks. They went on for 3 years. Now try and imagine that. After the first week and you get beaten up and you're not making any progress, you come home, they say, well, you guys tried. But you go back another week. And you say, well, how long are you going to keep trying for? After a while, your wife and your family, your brothers and sisters saying to you, it's enough already, you're not getting any place. And they keep going. And they keep going on for 3 years against a mighty army. And at the end of the 3 years, they managed to succeed. There was also a brave woman mentioned in the story. Her name was Yehudit. What she did, she invited an Assyrian general into her home. She fed him salty cheese. She also had wine. And I suppose the salty cheese made him drink more wine until he actually passed out. Then she cut his head off, took his head and showed it to his troops. And I think that because they saw their general's head without the general's body, which was a shocking enough experience, but that a woman had done this, they fled. And the whole campaign actually became successful, which allowed them to rededicate the temple in Jerusalem from being a pagan temple into being a Jewish temple. Rededication is the word Chanukah, Chanukhat Habayit, means rededicating the house from which we get Hanukkah. And this is known as the Festival of Lights. The reason it's called the Festival of Lights is obviously because of not the candles. It's called the Festival of Lights. It was called the Festival of Lights by Josephus Flavius. He wrote a book called The Antiquities of the Jews in the 1st century. It was 100 years later. And what he wrote there was that this was a time when they brought ancient rituals back to life in the back to light in the temple. There was no mention of oil. There was no mention of candles. No mention of rekindling lights. In fact, this business of light only appeared, the miracle of the oil that burnt, was only mentioned 600 years later. It seemed for 600 years, no one even knew about this. First, if there ever was a miracle, but nobody ever knew about it. It took 600 years before it was spoken about in the Talmud. Now, the lights are quite an interesting notion. Initially, there would be 8 days in which you lit lights, and the question is, why 8 days? Well, historically, the people came out of the caves, having been hidden in the caves during the festival of Sukkot. Now that they came out of the caves, they celebrated the festival of Sukkot, the 8 days, at Hanukkah time. That's why we have 8 days of Hanukkah. That's where the number comes from the number of days in Sukkot. About that time, they came up with this idea much later about this oil that was burning for longer than it should. But the miracle that we're celebrating Hanukkah because of a miracle was a new idea. In fact, what had happened for many, many years is you lit a candle for 8 days, remembering that something nice had happened. It was only later that they said, yes, they found one jar of oil. And that one jar of oil lasted for 8 days. And the interesting part of this is when you light your Hanukkah, you'll notice it actually has 9 branches, not 8 branches. This one over here is called the Shamash, or the helper, and you use this one to light the other ones. As we saw this evening with the matches, you'd use that to light the candles, so we just do that. And this one you can blow out afterwards and reuse. When you set this up, you first put in the one on the extreme right, and that's your first candle. Then you put your second one in on the second night. When you light candles, you always light them from this side that way, but you put them in from that side that way. And you say the bracha. And the bracha is about these, and every night is supposed to have one more candle. And there's another important part about this, is this should be in some place which is public. People should be able to see the candelabra. So you put them on your window, outside your door, wherever you possibly can. And you ask, what is all this about? And what's that got to do with the miracle of light? And I think there's a beautiful message in it. Instead of lighting one candle each night for 8 nights, we light 1, and then 2, and then 3, all the way up to 8. It seems every night we're reminding ourselves that about the story of people who were fighting for their freedom, and they fought for their freedom longer than you could possibly imagine. You'd have expected them to have given up after a month, 2 months, not keep going for 3 years. One of the things that happens to people as we age is, and not only as you get geriatric, but even as you're younger, you're in varsity, and then you're very passionate about causes. And then you enter the real world. And the major cause in the real world is get a career, get going, and start building your family. And all the idealism that you had sort of goes away. It fades. This here is to remind us that idealism can last longer than you can possibly imagine. It gets stronger. It can get stronger and stronger and stronger over time. We need to share the idea of idealism with other people. We need to put our candles at our windows so that people can see. People need to encourage each other to hold on to their idealism longer than you can possibly imagine. It's extraordinarily difficult for one person to hold on to their idealism for a long period, when we know other people are doing the same thing. You can hold on for a very long time. Our message, our takeaway from this, is that idealism can last longer, can last 8 days, when it shouldn't have. Idealism you would think would last for 1 day, but it can keep going forever. And what's it got to do with the gender violence? We're not going to cure it now. We're not going to end this scourge, this pandemic quickly. But we've got to keep going. We've got to keep going for this type of idealism, for freedom. We have to keep going longer than we could possibly expect. So Chanukah Sameach, and it begins on Sunday night. We now turn to the Kiddush, which is going to be recited, please. No,
So what you're going to know is I'm deaf only here.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, that's fine. There we go. Vayehi erev, vayehi boker, yom hashishi. Vayechul hashamayim va'aretz v'chol tzava'am. Vayechal Elohim b'yom hashvi'i melachto asher asa. Vayishpot b'yom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa. Vayevarech Elohim et yom hashvi'i. Vayikadesh oto, ki bo Shabbat mikol melachto, asher bara Elohim la'asot. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'rahatzavanu. V'shabbat kodsho b'yavav ratzon hinchilanu. Zikaron למעשה בראשית, כי ביום תחילה למקרה קודש זכר יציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך ביעבר ורצון הנחלתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת.
Amen. Thank you. And beautifully sung. Thank you. We now turn to page 587 for the concluding prayer, the Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשינו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה. השמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים עמה, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרומים. ואלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום ושבותה אל לבביך. כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחתינו.
Top of page 589. Let the time not be too distant, God, when all will turn to you in love, when corruption and evil will give way to integrity and to goodness, when superstition, false information, and prejudices will no longer enslave our minds, nor will the idolatry of thin ideas and cheap pleasures blind our eyes. May everyone who is created in your image, become one in spirit and one in friendship, forever united in your service of doing tikkun olam, of fixing the world. Then will your realm be established on earth, and the words of your prophet will be fulfilled. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. Now turn to the section where we remember people who've passed away in our community. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light long after the star itself is gone. So it is with people that we have loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest skies, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. We remember Sunny Tokachale, Henry Applebaum, Hans Kohn, Robin Groneman, Richard Ostrowick, Emmanuel Somek, Sandra Diamond, Maud Gordon, from Beit Menorah in Pretoria, We remember Paul Luptek, Dorothy Edith Wax, and who passed away recently, Mark Milner. From Beit David in Durban, Sydney Shammerman, Dinky Berman, Maureen Bates, Leah Klein, Gerard Groot, Helene Rebeck, Manfred Beit, who passed away recently in our community, Leslie Cole, longtime member of Beit David and his husband of Beverly and father of Karen, Jody and Daryl Kroll, Pina Hoberman, honorary life president of the WPJSA, who passed away in Cape Town, Eliyahu David Kay, who was killed in Israel and mourned by the world Jewish community. We're going to say Kaddish together, in memory of people that you're saying Kaddish for personally, and also in memory of people who don't have anybody to say Kaddish for them now. We say Kaddish for all of those. This page 598. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, b'olma divrach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei t'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah m'vorach lalam olmei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dikudsha brichu, Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'amiran b'olma v'mru amen, yehei shlama rabba mishmaya, v'chayim aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'mru amen, oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'akol yoshvei tevel v'mru amen. We conclude our service with the singing of Adon Olam.
Adon Olam Hashem alav, b'terem kol etzir nivra, ve'et nasa b'chetzo kol, azay melech shemo nivra, ve'acharei kiklot hakol, levado yimloch nora, ve'hu hayah ve'hu בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה, והוא אלי וחי גואלי, וצור חבלי בצרה, והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנת כוס לי, ביום אקרא ביד.
Shabbat Shalom to all of you, and I hope that this Shabbat is a very special one, where you can actually feel tranquility and peacefulness in your homes and all around us. Shabbat Shalom to you all.
Shabbat Shalom. I wanted to end, and Yeshua, Ian, by the way, for taking us into and back out of the Maccabees. I wanted to end with a little bit of Peter, Paul, and Mary, who wrote a song called Light One Candle. Light one candle for the Maccabee children with thanks that their light didn't die. Light one candle for the pain they endured when their right to exist was denied. Light one candle for the terrible sacrifice justice and freedom demand. But light one candle for the wisdom to know when the peacemaker's time is at hand. May we all not only enjoy this Shabbat, but also find meaningful ways of bringing our light into the world. May we bring those candles with us to fight injustice, to make a path for our grandchildren, and to create peace. Shabbat Shalom.
I'm going to say the hamotzi now, and please, on your way out, help yourself to some of the bread. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings bread out of the earth. Brings bread out of the earth.
Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom, Shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shalom u'mvorach, Shabbat shalom, Shalom u'mvorach, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom.